Some punishments in history were not just brutal, they were downright sickening. We are talking about torture, so disturbing, it will make your stomach turn. And the worst part? They were all legal, used by kings, emperors, and entire empires to control, scare, and destroy. You won't believe how far humanity once went in the name of justice. These are the most disturbing punishments in history, and yes, they'll gross you out. 11. The Scold's Bridle. Back in the dark days of medieval Europe, if a woman spoke too much or simply said the wrong thing, she could be forced into wearing something called the Scold's Bridle. This wasn't a punishment for murder or theft. No, this was for talking back, gossiping, or being outspoken. The bridle was a metal mask, shaped to fit tightly around the head, with a sharp piece inside that dug into the tongue every time the woman tried to speak. Just imagine the pain of having a spike pressed into your mouth with every tiny movement. And it didn't end there. Women were paraded around town with this cage on their heads while people pointed, laughed, or threw things. This wasn't just about pain. It was public humiliation, meant to silence women and strip away their dignity. It was cruelty hiding behind a so-called lesson in manners. 10. Rat torture. If you think rats are creepy on their own, wait until you hear how they were used for torture. This method didn't just scare people. It scarred them in the worst way. A live rat was placed on someone's bare stomach or chest. Then, a metal container was put over the rat, trapping it. Heat was applied to the container. Fire, hot coals, anything to raise the temperature. The rat, desperate to escape, had only one direction to go through the person's flesh. It would start clawing and biting its way through skin and muscle, trying to dig its way out. You can't imagine the terror and agony unless you think about what it feels like to be alive while something chews through your body. This was used in many places and during different periods in history, from ancient empires to modern dictatorships. And every time it left behind one message: pure fear. 9. Gibbeting. Sometimes the punishment didn't stop at death. In England and parts of Europe, criminals were placed inside iron cages, not to be jailed, but after they were already dead. These cages were hung from trees or poles by the roadside. As the days passed, the body inside would rot in front of everyone. The skin would peel off, the stench would fill the air, and the bones would slowly fall apart. People walking by were reminded, this is what happens if you break the law. It wasn't just a warning, it was a public display of horror, meant to haunt anyone who saw it. And if the body wasn't fully dead before being put in the cage, well, that made the punishment even worse. 8. Pain by crushing. Peine forte dure. Refusing to confess in medieval courts could be deadly. If you didn't plead guilty or innocent, you were crushed slowly. Stones were piled on your chest one by one. The pain grew heavier, your ribs cracked, your lungs collapsed. The goal: force you to speak, or crush you into silence forever. Next, we head into something even more sickening: skin being removed while you're still alive. 7. Flaying alive. Now imagine this: being tied down while someone slowly peels off your skin, piece by piece. This wasn't a quick punishment. It was a slow, agonizing process known as flaying. The executioner would start at the arms or legs and slowly cut away the skin, trying to keep the victim alive as long as possible. Every second was pure torment. With every inch of skin removed, the raw flesh underneath was exposed to air, dirt, and flies. Victims would scream in agony, often fainting from the pain, only to wake up again and suffer more. Some died from shock or blood loss. Others lasted hours. In some cultures, the flayed skin was even worn by priests or used in rituals. The message was clear: break the rules, and you'll lose more than your life. 6. Lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts. If flaying wasn't slow enough, China came up with a punishment that pushed the limits even further. It was called Lingchi, also known as death by 1,000 cuts. The victim was tied up and cut, not once, not twice, but hundreds of times. Small slices were made on the arms, legs, chest, and even the face. This wasn't done to kill quickly. It was done to make the person suffer until their last breath. It could take hours for them to die. The worst part? It wasn't just physical pain. This punishment was meant to disgrace the victim, to destroy their soul as well as their body. In some beliefs, having a whole body was needed for peace after death, and Lingchi made sure that never happened. 5. Blood Eagle. The Vikings were known for their battles and brutal raids, but their punishments were just as terrifying. One of the worst was the Blood Eagle. The person would be laid face down, and the executioner would slice open their back. Then, the ribs were broken apart and pulled outward, like wings. Finally, the lungs were dragged out through the gap, flopping over the ribs. The victim was usually still alive during most of this. The pain? Beyond description. Some say this was done to traitors as a warning to others. Whether all the details are true or not, just the idea of it has sent chills down spines for centuries. 4. The Brazen Bull. Now this one is almost too cruel to believe. In ancient Greece, a man named Perilos invented a metal bull statue, hollow on the inside. A person would be locked inside, and a fire lit beneath the belly of the bull. Slowly, the metal heated up, and so did the person inside. They would be roasted alive. But here's the twisted part. The bull was designed so the person's screams would echo through pipes and come out sounding like the roar of a real bull. People watched it happen, not with horror, but with applause. It was part execution, part twisted entertainment. Next, we head to a punishment so revolting, it involved being trapped inside something that was already dead. 3. Sewn inside a dead animal. In some ancient cultures, people found horrifying ways to punish their enemies. One of the worst was sewing a person inside the body of a dead animal, usually a horse or a camel. First, the person's arms and legs would be broken so they couldn't move or escape. Then they were stuffed inside the animal's belly, and the body was stitched closed. Imagine being stuck in a rotting carcass, where there's barely any air to breathe and the smell is unbearable. As the body of the animal rotted, so did the air inside. The person inside would slowly suffocate, overheat, or die from infection. But that's not all. Wild animals like dogs, wolves, and birds would come and start eating the carcass. Sometimes while the person inside was still alive. It wasn't just torture. It was a slow, terrifying end with no dignity, no mercy. 2. Execution by elephant. In some parts of ancient Asia, elephants weren't just used for war or labor. They were also executioners. These massive animals were trained to crush people to death on command. Sometimes the person was laid on the ground, and the elephant would stomp on them with its full weight, smashing bones and organs instantly. But in other cases, it was far worse. The elephant was trained to drag out the suffering, using its trunk to rip off limbs or press down slowly, so the person didn't die right away. In some versions, blades were tied to the elephant's tusks, turning it into a living weapon. Crowds would gather to watch, and rulers used it to show their power. If the king said to stop, the elephant would freeze. If the king nodded again, the elephant would finish the job. This punishment was terrifying, not just because of the pain, but because it showed how easily life could be ended, with the wave of a ruler's hand. 1. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. Finally, we reach what many consider the most gruesome punishment ever invented, being hanged, drawn, and quartered. This was used in medieval England, especially for people accused of betraying the king. First, the victim was tied to a wooden board and dragged through the streets by a horse, not dead yet, just humiliated in front of the crowd. At the execution site, they were hanged, but not to death, just until they were about to pass out. Then, while still alive, their body was cut open. Their organs were pulled out and burned in front of them. The pain was beyond anything most of us can even imagine. Finally, the person was chopped into 4 parts. Their head was cut off and stuck on a pole, often displayed on a bridge or city gate. The rest of their body was sent to different towns as a warning. This wasn't just punishment. It was a message written in blood. Break the rules and you won't just die. You'll be destroyed in the most horrifying way possible.